against any sudden unilateral move. Emily is in Washington watching the final chapter of the Obama presidency and preparing to report on the next. Emily.
Yeah, in his last press conference, President Obama conceded that Donald Trump was unlikely to take his advice, given that he'd won the election on a vehemently anti-Obama platform. But he warned the newcomer that perhaps he would be hit by the complexities of the role once in office, and that his thinking might shift on issues around healthcare, Obamacare, and indeed jobs. He described phone calls between the two men as constructive and lengthy, and said the best advice that he could give was to try and rely on those around him. It was not, he said, a job for one man alone. But perhaps the most memorable moment was his rebuff to Trump. He opened by issuing a vocal defense of the White House press corps, which Trump has already hinted he might now move outside the White House. And he insisted that the reporters covering his administration were an essential facet of a functioning democracy. Have a listen.
You're not supposed to be sycophants. You're supposed to be skeptics. You're supposed to ask me tough questions. You're not supposed to be complimentary, but you're supposed to cast a critical eye on folks who hold enormous power and make sure that we are accountable to the people who sent us here. And you have done that. And you've done it, for the most part, in ways that I could appreciate for fairness, even if I didn't always agree with your conclusions.
It will be understood, I guess, as a rebuke to Trump, who has picked those very public, very personal fights with individual reporters and their news organizations. He's lambasted them in the past week or so for fake news, a term he has now almost weaponized to deal with anything he doesn't like very much. This was the last time that Obama will speak in public as president. He leaves office with near record approval ratings and a flurry of last-minute activity, which might suggest an awareness of the many things he still leaves undone. So what will his legacy be like? We look back at the last 8 years.
We will go out and remake America, and then we will change the world.
I mean, when you study anyone and understand why they do it, you become more sympathetic. When you study Obama, it's hard not to become a fan.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
The description that Obama led from behind in many ways was true. You can't say that he didn't do anything. They certainly did a lot, but the actions that they took, it just wasn't enough to make a difference.
I think we got more change than a lot of people thought was possible. There are 20 million more people that are insured in this country than were in 2008. Of course, we're fighting to keep that right now, today, as I talk to you, and trying to make sure that people can keep their health care. There has been change in that. There's been change in marriage equality. There's been change all over this country when we think about how marginalized people have been protected. And yet there is still much more change that needs to happen.
You just cannot underestimate how bad the decks were, how bad the cards he'd inherited in terms of the economy. And nobody ever gets credit. No politician in history ever has gotten credit for averting a disaster. But Obama, the technocrat, the hard-nosed, rational technocrat, who passed the largest stimulus in U.S. history and compromised to do it. People forget that. They talk about him, unwilling to bend arms, but he did get Republicans to vote for that stimulus, which is why it passed, which is really why there wasn't a second Great Depression.
Hands up, Mike! Obamacare!
And his first 2 years in office, he passed more legislation and did more major things, really, than any other progressive president has done, really, in living memory. And part of the problem that caused was that there was a counterattack.
We're not going to give up, and we're going to fight. We're going to get rid of him in 2012.
But that coalition of less educated, rural, people who are kind of losers in the globalization game, is exactly the same coalition that put Donald Trump into the White House. And it's just a straight line, you can see it. The Democratic Party at the grassroots has really been decimated under Obama. They've lost most of the state houses, they've lost most of the state legislatures. The party under Obama, in some sense, has hollowed out, and it's going to be very, very hard for them to come back from that.
And on January 20th, I will become the first president of the United States to serve 2 full terms during a time of war.
I wouldn't give him a great score on foreign policy. He had 2 successes, Cuba and Iran. I think they will survive the Trump presidency. But the rest, I worked on a lot of other issues, on ISIL, on Syria, on Ukraine, and he wasn't as strong as he could have been on those issues. I would give Obama poor marks, of course, on Syria. I worked on Syria in the State Department for several years, and I think there were several points when had Obama done much more than he did, things really could have changed. He had legitimate reasons for avoiding getting more involved, but unfortunately, you ignore unpleasant parts of the world at your peril. You can't contain a conflict like Syria. So what have we had as a result of Syria? We have ISIL. And ISIL, by the way, not just in that region, but we've seen attacks in many other countries in Europe as well. We also had the migration crisis.
We went into Iraq and it didn't work. We tried persuasion in Egypt and it didn't work. We tried limited intervention in Libya and it didn't work. We didn't intervene in Syria and it didn't work. I mean, really, the person who said the thing you have to be is lucky has probably got the answer.
If we could just recognize ourselves in one another, bring everybody together, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Latino, Asian, and Native American, black and white, gay and straight, disabled and not.
The first time I ever went into the White House, when President Barack Obama actually lived there, that was the first thing that came to mind, that my ancestors and that my enslaved ancestors built that house that for so long we had to enter the back door of, for so long we were not allowed in the dining rooms of, let alone in the Oval Office. So for a lot of us, having a black man in the White House represented hope.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
That's not a great legacy on race, but that's not Obama's legacy on race. That's an American legacy on race. If people are tired of hearing about racism, I can guarantee you that we are far more tired of dealing with racism. But at the end of the day, people confuse identifying racism with actual racism. That doesn't mean that race relations have gotten worse. It just means that people have become more aware.
I'm asking you to believe, not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours. Yes, we can. Yes, we did. Yes, we can. Thank you. God bless you. May God continue to bless the United States of America.